another video review for the NCE, the National Counselor's Exam. Um, if you saw my previous video, I talked about some things that I feel like you should know, some really helpful like study guides, study tips, study resources. And I kind of mentioned that I was thinking about doing my own like review type videos. So that is what this video is going to be. This is going to be the first of, I guess, a little series. So I'm going to start with like the human development and kind of the big theorists that I really feel like you should know going into the test, because they definitely are scattered throughout the test, and knowing your theorists is really important, and knowing how your theorists would respond to different clinical situations is also very important. So I'm going to start um, with the human development theorists, like I said, and kind of just work my way through. Um, I'm also going to have like some notes that I took while I was studying. My handwriting is not the greatest. I'm not a calligraphy person by any means, so I'm gonna have it kind of small in case you don't really want to look at my handwriting. But if you feel like seeing my notes is helpful, let me know in the comments. If you feel like it's not helpful, also let me know in the comments. If you feel like this review itself is helpful or unhelpful, let me know. It's not going to hurt my feelings. I'll be fine. So yeah, here, let's go ahead and get started. So I also have more notes that I took while I was studying. So I am a very visual person. I need to write things down in order for me to remember it. And I need to write it down multiple times. So I have notes in this notebook. I have notes on my iPad. I have notes on my phone. I have notes everywhere because I am somebody who needs to repeat things multiple times in order for me to really understand it. And yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the first theorist I'm going to start with is Sigmund Freud. And I feel like most people, when they think of psychology, when they think of counseling or therapy, this is who you automatically think of. Freud is considered kind of the father of talk therapy, right? So you think of laying down on your couch, talking about all your problems, you're thinking about Freud. Freud is very psychoanalytic. He believed that, he is the expert in the counseling relationship, and that he is there to prescribe solutions to your problems. Um, and under his kind of psychoanalytic mind, he came up with the psychosexual stages. So you have the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stage. And I have those written down in my notes. So the oral stage is from ages like 0 to 1, right? And so this is when the ego is starting to develop. You're starting to kind of understand what your parents will, tolerate and not tolerate from that young age. You're getting your needs met or you're not getting your needs met. And you have a fascination or fixation with the mouth, right? So when you see young children, what is the first thing they do when they get something? They put it in their mouth. They get all of their stimulation from their mouth. So oral, mouth kind of goes together, right? Second stage is anal, and that is from 1 to 3 years old. And how I remember that is kind of, that's when most kids, they're being potty trained, right? So they're starting to learn how to use the toilet, how to use the bathroom. So they kind of have that fascination or fixation on going to the bathroom on their own time. They might um, hold their feces, hold their urine, just kind of hold it all in and go when they want to, not necessarily when their parents want to. The phallic stage is age 3 to 7. So this is when the superego develops. And the superego is like the opposite of the id, right? It's the opposite of the pleasure principle. It wants to do everything that is morally right. Wants to follow all of the rules, never do anything that's going to give you that instant gratification. Um, yeah, and I'll go over the id, ego, and superego a little bit later. And then after the phallic stage, you have the latency stage. And this is from age like 7 to 12. So Freud believed that there was little to no sexual motivation in this stage. That's why it's latency, right? It's latent. There's not a whole lot of sexual things going on. And then in adolescence, you have the genital stage. And that is when, you start going through puberty. If you haven't already, you have that really significant interest in the same sex or the opposite sex. And that is usually when intercourse is eventually going to happen in the genital stage. So, other things with Freud, like I mentioned, the id, ego, and superego, those are important to know. The id is the pleasure principle. It drives off of I want what I want as soon as I want it, and I'm going to get it, and it doesn't matter how I get it. The ego is the reality principle. So it's kind of like looking at the good and the bad of every situation and figuring out what your best option is going to be. And then after that, you have the superego, which is the moral principle, and it looks at the rules of society. So whatever society says, that's what the superego is going to go with. It doesn't question it. It's very much the opposite of the id, like I said before. And Freud also believed in the libido. And the libido is like your sexual drive, right? And he believes that all of our motivation comes from some sort of sexual drive. So when you think of Freud and you're thinking about his interventions, you have free association. So it's kind of like saying whatever comes to your mind. You have the thematic appreciation test, and that's when Freud would like show his clients a picture and say, what do you see in this picture? And, of course, he had the right answer. More often than not, the clients, in his opinion, were giving a wrong answer. So he would say, like, okay, so based on your answer, this is what this means about you. He also believed in dream analysis and the Rorschach test or the ink blot test. So that's also what a lot of people think of when they think of like traditional psychotherapy. That paper that has the ink blot on it, and the therapist is saying, "What do you see in this picture? Tell me what you see." The first thing that comes to mind. Other than that, you have your defense mechanisms, and there are a significant amount of defense mechanisms, and it's helpful to know these for the exam because a few of them do show up. So you have displacement, projection, reaction formation, sublimation, rationalization, and identification. Okay, so displacement is kind of taking how you feel from one situation and bringing it to another situation. So say you are at work and your boss is really on you because you're behind in things or you filled out a paperwork wrong or something like that, and they kind of give you criticism. And you feel some type of way about that. You feel like you did fine, but you don't want to say that to them. So instead of taking your anger out on them, you hold on to it, until you get home and you take it out on your spouse or your kids or your dog or something like that. So that is displacement. When you think of projection, I used to get these kind of mixed up. So projection is kind of taking how you feel about yourself and putting it onto other people. So say you wake up late one morning and you're really like flustered, you're mad at yourself for waking up late, and then you get to pick your kid up from practice and practice runs late, so your kid is late getting to the car. And first thing you say, you're always late, you're never on time. Why can't you ever, be on time, right? You're taking how you feel about yourself and projecting it onto your child. So that is a very common example of projection. Let's see, reaction formation is kind of when you do the opposite of how you actually feel in a situation. So what kind of helped me remember this is when you're little, right? And there's like a kid on the playground who like messes with you. and the teacher or your parent or whoever says, oh, they're just doing this because they like you. They're messing with you because they like you. They're doing the opposite of what, you know, is a healthy way to show that you like somebody. Let's see. Sublimation is finding a socially acceptable way to do things that might normally be unacceptable. So, say you have a child who is very aggressive, right? They're just aggressive. They like to fight, they like to yell, scream, hit, kick, all of that. So, you find a way to kind of help them channel that. So you put them in football, or you put them in boxing, or you put them in some kind of physical sport that lets them kind of get that physical aggression out in a socially acceptable way. Regression. So regression, when you look at the stages, right? Oral, anal, phallic, all of those. So regression would be going from like the latency stage backwards to the phallic stage. So you're regressing, you're moving backwards unintentionally. If you have fixation, then that is when you get stuck in a stage. You're fixated on this one stage. So an example from school that I remember is in the oral stage, somebody who gets fixated on that stage or doesn't move past it in a developmentally appropriate way, something that you might see in them is they're a smoker, or they're an alcoholic, or they do something that shows that they're still fixated on their mouth, right? They might overeat, something that has to do with them putting things in their mouth. So that shows that they're kind of fixated in that oral stage. Let's see. So another defense mechanism is denial, kind of just denying the truth, right? Refusing to accept whatever the truth is. Freud also talked about transference and countertransference. So transference is when the client it's kind of like projecting a different relationship onto the client-counselor relationship. So if me as a female, right, the client might start to view me the same way that they view their mom or their grandma or their aunt or something like that, and kind of transfer however they feel about that relationship onto our relationship. Countertransference is when me, the counselor, I have some unresolved things and I'm putting that onto the client-counselor relationship. I'm putting that onto the client. And in that case, it's really important for counselors to, seek supervision, see their own counselor or therapist, which, I advocate for that anyway because, everybody needs somebody to talk to, everybody needs a therapist, and there's nothing wrong with therapists having therapists. That is very much encouraged. Okay, so that is the general things about Freud. And when I'm going through these theorists, I'm not doing like a whole in-depth, like every single thing they believe. No, I'm not doing that. I'm focusing on what's kind of important for the test, for the NCE. If you want like a more in-depth review, just let me know and I can do that. But for this video, I feel like it's going to be long enough, so I'm going to try to just stick to the basics. Okay, so after Freud, we have Erikson. And Erikson had his psychosocial stages, so he is not psychoanalytic like Freud, right? Erikson believed that you had to move through these stages, chronologically, and that by moving through the stages, you're able to develop healthy relationships with others and yourself. So when we look at these stages and when you're studying them for the test, it's important to not just memorize them. You need to know what's kind of happening in these stages, and how to recognize them in a scenario. So again, I have all of the stages listed out. In the first stage, trust versus mistrust, that's when infants are learning, can they trust their caregiver? That's when they're learning, does the caregiver understand what I need when I cry? Are they feeding me? Are they picking me up? Are they changing my diaper? Are they, giving them the things that they need? And in that stage, there's either trust or mistrust. So, to move on in a healthy way, you would hope that the client was able to develop trust with their caregiver. In the second stage, autonomy versus shame or doubt, that's when, kids are kind of building their own self-confidence. So that's when they want to do things on their own. They want to get themselves dressed. They're learning to feed themselves. They really want to have that sense of a little bit of independence with the support of their caregivers. So if they're given the space to do those things, they develop more self-confidence. If they don't, then they kind of have a sense of self-doubt, and that kind of carries on with them as they continue to get older. In the next stage, initiative versus guilt. That's, to me, it's kind of similar. The kids are kind of, again, learning what they're good at, learning what they can and what they can't do. And so being able to learn those things is just building further on that self-confidence and building on that sense of self. And then in industry versus inferiority, that's that school age, right? So they're kind of learning their place in the world, learning, okay, what are some things that I'm good at? So a lot of times at that stage, parents are putting their kids in sports. And it's really important to, get your kid out there so that they can learn what they're good at, so that they can work on those social skills, those team building skills, those communication skills that they're going to need throughout the rest of their life. So they kind of learn self-discovery, and they're learning how to motivate themselves and things like that. So in the identity versus role confusion stage, that's the high school age, 13 to 19. So kids are kind of learning their role again. They might have some kind of like internal identity crisis, trying to figure out how to get along with their friends. They might be conforming to societal standards. And they could develop a little bit of role confusion, if they aren't able to figure out their self-identity and how they can fit in while still being themselves. And then the next stage, intimacy versus isolation. That stage is a heavy emphasis on family and building those strong relationships. So that's when typically people are branching out on their own, kind of moving out of their parents. They might be going to college, trade school, starting to build their own life separate from their parents. So they really emphasize those relationships that they're starting to build outside of their family. Then you have generativity versus stagnation. And in that stage, there is heavy emphasis on kind of giving back to the youth and what you're leaving behind for the next generation. So you might see parents wanting to spend a lot of time with their grandkids, or reaching out to their kids a little bit more, trying to just maybe fix old relationships, figuring out what they can do to give back since they're getting older. And the final stage, ego integrity versus despair, is kind of, getting older, very much closer to death. And it's a lot of reflection and looking back on your life and seeing if you're content with the life you've lived or if you have a lot of regret. Hopefully when you look back, you're able to look back on the relationships you had, the life you lived, the career, the family, all of those things, and feel content. But unfortunately, there are people who feel regret at the end of their life for things that they didn't get to do, or a life that they didn't actually live. So that is Erikson. All right. After Erikson, we have Piaget, however you say it, his stages of development, and there are 4 levels. So sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. The sensory motor is kind of self-explanatory. Sensory, your senses, that is when children are very aware of their environment, by using their senses. So they touch everything, they put everything in their mouth. They are learning object permanence, which is when, say, you play peekaboo with a child. Before they learn object permanence, they really think you disappeared. If they can't see you, you're gone. If they can't see the toy that you're holding, because you put it behind your back, that toy is gone. It no longer exists. But once they, go through this stage, they grasp object permanence. So they understand that, okay, you might be behind the wall, behind the couch, but you're still there. The toy might have rolled under the couch, but it's still there. Um, the next stage is pre-operational. And in this stage, that is when kids are very egocentric. So the world kind of revolves around them, right? It's very hard for them to see other people's perspectives or point of view. And I kind of think of this age as the million questions. So kids are asking why to everything. They're getting a little bit more intuitive. They want to understand why things work. So when kids are questioning everything in this age range from that 2 to 7, it's not because they're trying to be annoying. I mean, I don't know, maybe some of them are, but it's because they really do want to learn why things are the way that they are. And then you have the concrete operational stage, and in this stage, kids are learning conservation. And in conservation, it's really understanding that I can pour your juice into a wide 8-ounce cup or a tall 8-ounce cup, and it's the same amount. It's no different. So those kids can understand it, while their younger brother or sister is gonna want the taller cup because it looks like more. And then in this stage, they're kind of learning that logical reasoning, kind of understanding what generalizations are, and really starting to build those inductive reasoning skills. The last stage is formal operations, and this is when kids are really developing their own sense of moral identity, their own personal identity, and they build those abstract thoughts so they can see more of the big picture and be able to compare things. So compare how they might have been now to how they were when they were a few years younger. They have the cognitive ability to do that. So another human development person is Kohlberg, and he is moral development. So there are 3 levels, right? But there's 6 stages. So the levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. In the pre-conventional stage, you have stage 1 and stage 2. In stage 1, you have your kids, they just want to be able to avoid getting in trouble. So they are going to obey the rules because of fear of punishment. They don't want to be punished. So that is their driving force. Then in stage 2, you have kids who are more driven by self-interest. So their thinking isn't, oh, I'm going to do this so I don't get punished. Their thinking is, what's in this for me? Like, what am I going to get out of doing this? And then after the pre-conventional, you have conventional. And you have stage 3 and stage 4 in this level. In stage 3, you have what's kind of considered the good boy or good girl mentality. And it's really just following whatever your peers are doing. So kids are really wanting to conform in this stage, and their morals are matching up with what their classmates might be doing, their kids on their team, things like that. And then in stage 4, it is very much morals are based on society's rules and law and order. Is what it is. It's very black and white, and kids haven't really developed their own sense of morals yet. In the post-conventional level, there's stage 5 and stage 6. So stage 5, you kind of developed a sense of flexibility in the rules. You don't just see things as law and order. You see things as, okay, well, this might be the law or the rule, but you might feel like there's exceptions to times where you might want to follow it and times where you might not. And in stage 6, and Kohlberg believes that it is rare for people to reach this stage, is when people kind of develop their own sense of morals and ethics. And it's kind of the highest level of moral development, where morality, justice, and compassion are the driving forces. Okay, this is a lot. Okay, and then, so this is like a side note, but it's also helpful to know because I do think she was mentioned on the exam. So Carol Gilligan, she initially studied with Kohlberg, right? She worked with him on his stages of moral development, but eventually she kind of went her own way because Kohlberg, when he was working on his theory, he studied mostly adolescent boys, and he didn't. So his study couldn't really be applied to women because he didn't study them. So Carol Gilligan, her moral development looked at the differences between men and women. So she had the care-based morality versus the justice-based morality. And can you kind of guess which gender falls under which? So she kind of said that women are more care-based and men are more justice-based. So the kind of differences that she noted were that the care-based tend to avoid violence. There is more of an emphasis on interconnectedness, and a higher ability to compromise, while the justice-based focused on inequality and really just saw the dilemma as a conflict, and that there just had to be a clear winner and a loser. So that is Carol Gilligan and Kohlberg. And let's see. So I'm gonna mention this briefly because Keegan, I don't think he was on the test. If he was, I think it would just be the first stages, because none of the other study material that I went through focused on him at all. So Keegan, he was a constructivist, and his developmental model, when looking at kids, it focused on their imagination. So he kind of saw that imagination and reality were not the same. Gonna let my dog get his drink. You done? Okay. So Keegan, like I said, I would review him, but he wasn't super important, at least for the test. So I would just really think about how he looked at imagination and the role that played in child development. All right. So after Keegan, we can do Maslow. And I know this is a lot. It's definitely a lot. But we're almost done. I don't know how long I've been going, but we're almost done. So Maslow, I feel like most people know who he is, right? His hierarchy of needs. So he believed that in order to reach the top of the pyramid that he created, that you had to meet your lower level of needs, because those are the ones that tend to take priority over the top. So at the bottom, you have your physiological needs, right? You need to be able to breathe, you need food, and you need to be able to sleep. Without those, you will focus on nothing else. And then you have safety, a place to sleep where you feel comfortable and you feel safe. And again, you have the resources that you need. Above that, you have love and belonging, so a sense of acceptance. Do you have people that you talk to? Do you have a support system? Do you have family or friends? And then you have esteem or self-confidence. And this is kind of looking at how you compare yourself to others. Your uniqueness, your career, how you show yourself off to the world. And at the very, very top, you have self-actualization, which is where you're able to be your authentic self. You're able to focus on creativity, and just doing what it is that you want to do. So, like I said, we tend to focus on the lower level of his hierarchy before getting to that self-actualization level. So a lot of times, there's a lot of people who don't seek counseling who could really benefit from it because they're working on those physiological needs or that sense of safety. And without having those needs met, counseling is not going to be a priority because they might not know where their next meal is coming from, or they might not have anywhere to sleep. If they don't have anywhere to sleep, why would they emphasize, going to talk to somebody about their problems? So that's when, this is a side note, but that's when, pointing people into the resources, community resources, is so important because people need that and they might not always know where to look. Okay. After Maslow, we have Adler, and he is psychodynamic, and he focused on individual psychology. So something that helped me remember Adler was that, so he was a really sick kid growing up. Like, he was just very sick. So one of the things he studied was like inferiority and superiority. So he believed that we're all born inferior. We're all born infants who need to be taken care of, who can't do things for themselves. So that makes us inferior, right? And as we get older, we're seeking to become superior. And he also believed that birth order is very important. So you have like the first, second, and third born, right? So the firstborn, he believed, is typically a leader, somebody who is kind of conservative, and they sometimes feel threatened by the birth of their younger sibling. And then you have your secondborn, who tends to be competitive, rebellious, but at the same time, they're the peacemaker. The thirdborn tends to be very social. They might get the most attention from their parents, and they tend to use their charm and other qualities to get their way. And then lastly, you have the only child, who he believed could, be very responsible at times, but they were also independent. But they might struggle with building relationships because they might feel entitled since, they're used to being on their own or not having to share with other siblings. He also had 4 personality types: ruling, learning, avoiding, and socially useful. So the ruling personality is somebody who is kind of pushy. They might be a bully to others, but they're also very energetic, while the learning person is a little bit more sensitive. They might be less energetic and dependent on others and have a little bit higher anxiety. The avoiding person tends to avoid challenges, hence the name, avoid. They like to avoid conflict and kind of be comfortable where they're at. And then the socially useful tends to be that kind of outgoing person who wants to do everything for everybody else, and they're really like a giver. Next, we're going to do Carl Rogers, and most people know of him as the client-centered, humanistic, person-centered, however you want to remember him. Rogers is a very non-directive type of therapist. He believes that the client knows the client best. He's not going to confront the client. He is not going to believe in like the unconscious. He very much believes that the client is in control of themselves. So something to remember, like an application thing for Rogers, is like, this approach might not be the best for people who are in active addiction. If somebody is actively using, they might not know what's best for them, right? Their focus is going to be on getting whatever it is that they want. Their focus might not be on healing themselves in that moment. So they might not be the person who should be in charge. Right. All right, so we got like 5 more people. We're almost there. So Albert Ellis, who is the kind of founder of Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, REBT, is kind of under cognitive therapy, right? So a quote that really that I like and that helps me kind of remember him is that men are disturbed not by the things, but by their view of them. So he really focused on people's cognitive thoughts. How you view things is going to affect how you feel about them. So he kind of believed in replacing irrational beliefs with rational beliefs. So you have A, B, C, right? The activating event, the belief, and the consequence. So you can't change the activating event, but you can change your thoughts about that event. And by changing your thought, you're going to change the consequence into either a positive or negative consequence. He also believed in like the shoulds, oughts, and musts, and that those fell under irrational beliefs. And with interventions, he used a lot of assigning homework, he used bibliotherapy, and those were to help you practice putting those rational beliefs into practice. Aaron Beck, which I think is similar to Ellis, Beck is CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. So again, it's looking at those cognitions, your thoughts, those irrational beliefs, and kind of seeing how we can disprove them or prove them. Prove that the thought is irrational or rational. And Beck also came up with, the Beck Depression Inventory and the Beck Anxiety Scale. Pearls is the father of Gestalt therapy. And just Gestalt therapy is it was very difficult for me to put into clinical practice. Like I knew the interventions, I knew what it was, but for some reason just seeing it written out in like a scenario, it was hard for me to place that as Gestalt therapy. But anyways, so Gestalt is very present focused. He was also kind of experiential and existential, so really like getting in there with the client or the family or whoever, and looking at how he can kind of insert himself in like a ethical and appropriate way, but inserting himself into those relationships. So when you're thinking about those interventions, he did a lot of role playing, confrontation. When you have the empty chair, that's him. If you have like the hot seat, that's him. And he also had a lot of emphasis less on the whys and more on the what and the how. And then, so you have Eric Byrne, who did transactional analysis. So Byrne looked at your life scripts. So your life scripts are kind of the games that you play, right? So it's really looking at what are you looking to get out of your relationships with people? What are your belief systems? What are the things that you're telling yourself that kind of rationalizes what you're doing? So he is also very present focused, and he did a lot of life script analysis. So to me, it's a little similar to narrative therapy. So it's looking at the script, your schema, what you believe, and seeing how you can rewrite that in a more beneficial way or in a more healthy way for you. And kind of side note, so Byrne believed in ego states, and when you remember ego states, you think of Freud, right? Id, ego, superego. So Byrne had the parent, the adult, and the child. And if you want to match those up to Freud's, the parent is the superego, the adult is the ego, and the child is the id. And something else that kind of comes up with Byrne is Cartman's triangle. And it's really looking at people's relationships with others. So top of the triangle, right? You have the victim, on the other side you have the persecutor, and you have the rescuer. And it's really looking at who in your life kind of goes into each of those roles. Okay. Next, we have Glasser, who founded reality therapy. And he believed that clients create their own lives. Their behaviors are what creates their life. So he doesn't look into your dreams. He's not going to look into the past, your trauma. He is not past focused at all. He is very much focused on your behaviors and how your behaviors are impacting your current life and how it is that you want to live. So he believed that everybody has the same psychological needs, a sense of belonging, power, freedom, and fun. And he also believes that there's 8 steps to building a relationship. So that is being present focused, having a contract or an action plan, committing to that plan, having no excuses, no punishments, and no giving up. So it's really focused on seeing how you're living your life and how it is that you want to change that. But Wobbleding, all that I studied from him is the WDEP. The wants, the direction and doing, evaluation or self-evaluation, and the plan. And that's literally just like an acronym to look at what the client wants to get out of therapy, what they're currently doing that's helping them do that or not do that, how the client is able to self-evaluate themselves and your evaluation of them, and what you guys come up with as your plan to move forward. So there's Lazarus, and he has multimodal therapy, and his mnemonic acronym, whatever, is basic id. So what that stands for is it's looking at the behaviors of the client, their effective responses, sensations that they might have to different stimulus or stimuli, images that they kind of replay for themselves, their interpersonal relationships, and the impact of drugs in their biology and what that has on their body. But okay, so that was a lot, and I hope that it was a little bit helpful, somewhat helpful. If you feel like there's things that I didn't go over, because I didn't go over every theorist, I do plan on making more videos, but you can definitely leave like questions in the comments, people that you feel like I should go over in the comments, and I will do that. And then in the next video, I plan on talking more about like career theorists, and of course going over the important theorists that I might have left out today. And yeah, so definitely let me know. Thumbs up this video if you liked it. Leave comments, leave feedback. Let me know what y'all want to see, and I will definitely do that. Again, be kind to yourself when you're studying. If you've been studying for 4 or 5 hours, take a break. Even if you've been studying for just an hour and you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to take a few minutes. Pull yourself together, take a deep breath. The material will still be there after you take a little break. So do what you need to do. Take care of yourself, and I will see y'all in the next video.